Good day to everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm glad to see so many of you here. Today we gathered to introduce a new book, but before introducing the new book, I want to show you the one more publication that was done in the context of this project. So we're very happy. There are big magazine, and then there's this new, very interesting book. So, and everything is done in the context of the project, the long name, EU Contemporary Puppetry Critical Platform, that is co-funded by Creative Europe. So they are our friends, and they make theater critics write about puppetry very happy now. So today we're introducing this smaller book, Contemporary Puppetry and Criticism. And we have a lot of co-authors, creators of the idea of the publication here in the panel. So we have Katarina, Igor, Benjamin, Gareth, and Inesa. So everybody will have a chance to introduce themselves and to tell more about how they're connected with this book. But first I want to ask Benjamin, why was it important to focus and give so much attention to the puppetry criticism?
Yeah, I think criticism in general is a field that in these days is actually quite radically fast, dying as a profession, just like as a job that somebody could live off. And everybody needs to have their own profession and then write critics as well. So that's usually people who work in arts that also write about art. When we come to puppetry, that has always been a bit of a subgenre of theater that didn't get a lot of academic attention in the contemporary times. When it comes to criticism, the situation is even worse. And I think it's our duty as creators or people who work in puppetry fields, either on a practical or a theoretical way, to nourish that profession, the criticism and the theory of puppetry. Modern times don't really provide a lot of written puppetry essays, academia, critics, or even handbooks that could help people who are interested in puppetry to start somewhere, to kick off, not only in practice, but also in theory. Theory always supports practice, and I think criticism is a part of theory. It could be. And that's why I think it's important to support it, to develop it, and to find new ways how to make it survive in times where everything is hyper-productive, everything is fast, nobody wants to read long articles anymore. So how to make it stay alive, make it reliable, relatable, and make it one of the panels of the theater of puppetry.
You touched upon one thing that I was not planning on asking about, but for me it's now very interesting. Is there a lot of contemporary puppet theater theory written? Is it also like theoretical work, academic work? Is it also
No, this is
lacking?
the first book ever. That's why it's important and small.
Okay.
No, I don't know.
So maybe, Igor, could you tell more about the book and the concept of the book?
Okay, as I said, this is the first. No, I'm kidding. I wanted that long name of our project, I wanted to put it in our book. So the main parts of the name were contemporary puppetry and criticism of contemporary puppetry. But I didn't want to put a lot of text, very good text in the book and say, oh, this is a great book, it has everything. I wanted to find some logical structure. And this was my first question: how can I build a bridge from contemporary puppetry to criticism? And I didn't know the answer until I get all the text. And then this text was about contemporary puppetry in Lithuania, in Scotland, in Slovenia and Croatia. And they had a lot of differences, and a few similarities. And one of the similarities that was the most important for me was that they all were looking for active viewer. And who is and what is critic? A critic is, как се каже, Javni active public active viewer, and this is the bridge that made in my head a great structure and connection between contemporary puppetry and criticism. Also, criticism is very important for theory, but I also think that because critic is in contemporary puppetry also some kind of co-author of the play, because he is the one who puts the answer into the questions or puts another questions into the questions. And that's why I think the criticism is even more important to contemporary puppetry than into, I don't know, traditional puppetry or drama theater or something like that. Second question was for me also very important, because we have 4 partners and I had 5 texts about contemporary puppetry, and one of them was from our French friend Didier Plassard, and he is big name in puppetry research, and I wanted him in the book and I didn't know where to put him, and I was reading his text 2-3 times, and then I found some place in which he was talking about today, where we have conflict in between human and non-human, between biology and technology and something like that. And in this conflict, one of the winners is puppetry, because puppetry has its conflict between animator and puppet, animator and object, material, all the elements of the play. And this was like the starting point to our contemporary story. And when you open this book, you will see a lot of good texts. And when I was reading them, I fell in love first in Slovenian contemporary puppetry, then in Scottish contemporary puppetry, but most of all into the Lithuanian contemporary puppetry. When we will go to Scotland, your will be my favorite, of course. But it was very interesting. When I was reading it, I was Googling and looking in YouTube links to your shows. So I think the book was very good for me. When I was reading it, I think it will be good also for you. Second part is the critical part, and third part is maybe the most important, but I wanted in third part that we, because we were talking about theory, about history, blah, 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 and we were also smart, but we didn't have a practicing level. And this was the third part of the book, in which we have text by our young participants of our workshops. So we, like in this third part, we have criticism of today and tomorrow, and this is also a very important part. I wanted to put 2 texts from each partner, but we didn't have money, and so we have only one. This is enough for me. I used all my English words.
For the time being.
Yeah. No.
Maybe you could add from your side, Katarina, what...
Katarina is editor. I was just editor-in-chief, but she is the... Yeah. Every wrong letter, this is hers.
I'm one of the editors for this English version of this book. Another colleague of ours, Lucia Perish, is the second editor. And I am a theatre researcher, but puppetry is not the focal point of my research and what I do. So it was quite interesting for me, and I felt like even as a student, like editor and student at the same time, because I could learn and read so much. I could really profit from reading old texts and expand my knowledge as well. So it was really like...
So maybe you will be drawn to the puppetry a little by little.
No. Yeah, little by little. Well, especially with this visual aspect of puppetry. Because I'm into visual aspect of drama, theater, scenography. So the scenography, like connection and of puppetry and scenography, how important scenography is for puppetry and how it works in a puppet theater performance, is something that I might kind of dive into a little bit. Yeah.
Great, we have one new colleague.
One more, we have 2 now in Croatia.
I fell in love with puppetry, what can I say?
Great. I would want to ask now, Gareth, about your experience, because you write in this book a text it's I want to say suggestions, but like introduction to a young writer about puppet theater criticism. So could you share your thoughts about young people writing, and why do you think it's important to inspire people to write?
I think, Igor, as you said, there's a problem being a critic as a working practice, and a lot of people are excluded because they can't afford to do it. So it seems very important to invite people to engage. I'm also very concerned that people can take ownership over their experience in the theatre, and I think criticism is a really positive way to do that. I like to think of criticism being, in its own right, an art form. So there are many people who want to write, who are engaged with writing. Young critics on our programme, very often they're interested in writing about all sorts of things, and we're focusing on puppetry because it's an opportunity for them to learn how to write and be part of a public conversation. I think in Scotland a lot of the piece that I wrote, apart from being a tremendous expression of my massive ego and self-interest and confusion as well. I think there's a lot of confusion there. But one of the things is there's quite a lot of scores I'm settling with other critics. So my advice to young people is really don't write like these other critics. I didn't quite go as far as naming them, but I will point out who they are.
Yes, you were. Yes,
I do very strongly. So on one hand, inviting young people to become critics is an act of revenge upon my colleagues in the Scottish critical profession. But another way, it seems to be about involving people in an active and creative part of the process. And as you say, the idea that the critic or even the audience are co-creators in the process of making theatre, and that's very important to me, and I think criticism is part of that dialogue, really.
Do you think there is a lot of difference between puppet theatre criticism and drama theatre criticism?
In Scotland it's all rubbish, so no, not really. I don't think so. I think that there are ways of thinking about puppetry that are applicable across. One of the things I'm very interested in is the idea of, can we use puppetry as a critical approach rather than just being about the performance, but what does it mean to think puppetry or think about a work in puppetry terms? Certainly in Scotland there's not enough space or even work to have specialists. There's no puppetry specialists in Scotland as critics. So within Scotland it's the same people and sadly the same ignorances and the same problems that manifest in drama, dance and puppetry. So no difference at all.
Okay. And in Slovenia and Croatia,
we have one in Croatia. We have one theater critic that specialized puppetry. It's only me, and we have a few of them that's writing about everything. But I think I think that's much creative to write about puppetry, especially about contemporary puppetry or contemporary acting plays, whatever is contemporary and goes with questions, not with final answers to you. Because when you write a critic about drama theater, you see it, you write it, you said, okay, it was good, it wasn't good, he had beautiful, I don't know, teeth because I saw them, because he was opening his mouth a lot. And in play like Dorian Gray, you can play with it. And this is where you are creative and playful, and that's why it's nice for me.
Well, in Slovenia we are lucky because it's not only me. Actually, it's not even me. But yeah, I think we're very privileged in this position because in 2015 we started a lot of seminars exclusively for puppetry criticism, and we got a group of critics that are really interested in puppetry and want to write about puppetry, want to work with puppets. They are here, most of them. Today, still with us, still writing, and they are very good writers. And I do think there's a difference of how you look at a show when the medium through which it is presented changes. So drama theater, puppetry, dance, I think knowledge that you have to assimilate, acquire as a critic must be different. I cannot write about dance because I do not understand their key structure. And I think that's important in puppetry, but that's why the education of puppetry critics is important. We have a lot of education in drama criticism even if you study dramaturgy, for example, you get those kind of that kind of knowledge. We don't have any puppetry school, so you have to acquire that through experience and through workshops and stuff like that. And I think we, thank God, we're quite successful in that. We acquired a group of 5 to 7 critics that know how to write about puppetry, are professional, and are, most importantly, good writers. So, and 7 is for Slovenia a lot. So we can have a lot of critics written, reviews written. The problem is where to put them, what to do with those critics. Do they just stay in a closed workshop environment? Do they go on a platform, which is now great. Of course, we have a platform specialized for puppetry, but there's also the question of newspapers. So we still have the reviews in newspapers, daily newspapers, are live. There are some, at least one per day appears, but not for puppetry. So I think this is our next step in the way how to work. We got the critics, they are good. We have the platform. Next stage is the printed media, I think, and this is one good example of printing reviews that are actually so well written that are already an academic text about puppetry. And I think that's very important.
Yes. I want to ask Inesa, because she's one of the young authors that's in the book. I wanted first to ask you, how did you get interested in writing about puppet theater?
That's a very good question. To be honest, I actually didn't have much to do with puppetry or theater. I'm into writing and like trying out different genres and such. And I found this call for this program online. And yeah, I thought, learning how to write critics would be interesting. And when I started, I got to learn more about puppetry. Now I'm in love, I'm converted totally. So yeah, I'm planning to continue to do so. But yeah, in the beginning, it wasn't anything really to do with that, pretty much.
I think that now Kristina would say, what about in Lithuania? Because you're the only one from Lithuania. And you're just asking questions. We want answers.
You're one of the authors as well.
Yes. In Lithuania, I think it's quite similar to the overall situation where we have mostly drama theater critics who sometimes also write about puppetry and not necessarily have the skills or the knowledge to analyze puppet theater performances. We don't have this problem of publishing the texts in printed media or websites like theater devoted for theater criticisms, but on the other hand, the issue is that these are funded sporadically, so we never know how much for text for a year will be possible to write and publish, and then the priority is always the big drama performances, not puppetry. Even not just puppetry, I mean dance or circus or anything. All of these more experimental genres are always theater fields are always left behind in favor of drama theater. But for me, this platform was also a very joyful experience because I met the young people who are so interesting and so inspired and so passionate about theater that I'm also rethinking my old and stubborn and already sad disappointed ways of being theater critic. Maybe there is some joy and hope for the future of criticism. But the thing that you were speaking, Benjamin, about these workshops, I'm very glad that in Lithuania we're also trying, not just in the context of this platform, this project, but also last year I organized a small workshop for theater critics with the International Theater Festival Materia Magica. And this year the festival is also organizing theater criticism workshop. So some things are now happening and we are trying to do something, because I think mostly in Lithuanian theater writing, when people still continue writing, then they need some specific knowledge, because writing about puppetry, most of you went to the museum today, and then when you see in the museum the different kinds of puppets, you have to know how they are called and what they do, and don't write in the review that, oh, this puppet didn't fly, but maybe this puppet cannot fly in the performance. So just a naive example, but still, the specificity of knowledge that you have to have before writing about puppetry that is not specifically needed for drama theater.
In Croatia, it's a problem that we don't have money in criticism. So nobody lives from criticism, but eventually for criticism. And our participants, I don't know, will anybody of you be a critic someday? Maybe, but they are students of, I don't know, acting and puppetry, and also design of puppet design and so on. And I think that it's very important for them to start to think critically, and then they will tomorrow start to think autocritically. And this is very important for artists also. And if you don't make it as artist, you always can write for free.
Yeah, but I think that's a very important point, because we can talk about experience and knowledge and, oh, puppetry, this and that. It's all nice, I love it, but I think money is a very, very crucial point, because and it's a crucial problem as well, because if we want this profession to survive, we need to pay the writers. Workshops and then providing the text for workshops for free is okay, but at one point when we start to publish the text, when these kind of platforms happen, or newspapers, if we continue to keep them on a volunteer basis, the profession as a whole will die off, because it will move to something else. And I think here is where it stops so far being funded. At least in Slovenia, for example, critical platforms or newspapers don't actually get a lot of money for reviews, especially reviews. They get a lot of money for other articles, but reviews. So you can't really make a living out of writing critics, but you can make something, and you have to make something. And then this paradox happens where theaters, of course, want criticism, because two points of view. Firstly, of course, reflection, as you mentioned. We have to reflect our work, and critics are there to do that for us and set us on ground when we get a bit pretentious. And secondly, it's, at least in Slovenia, reviews give you more points when you ask for money, always. More reviews means more show is more successful. So we need the critics. They don't need us as much as we do need them. And the paradoxical thing is then that theaters start financing a critical platform for themselves. I think it shows a diagnosis of how hard it is to maneuver this in the media world, that theaters themselves have to start funding that, and they have to start paying the critics and working with them, actually. But then, of course, have to also accept that the criticism has to be their own objective writing. But yeah, I wanted to point that out. We need to pay the work, always. I think that's one statement that we need to really stand by if we want the criticism of puppetry to develop and to survive.
In Lithuania, I see the similarities in Lithuania, but not because the criticism is not paid, but because there are just so many new performances that you can write reviews of in puppet theaters across the whole country. So if you want to survive as theater critic from writing, then you have to write a lot of different things, and you have to review many types of performances. And what's the situation in Scotland? Do you see some similarities, or is it just, or you all have like platforms where to write? It's just that your colleagues don't really put the effort.
Yeah, they're not very good. No, I think it's a big problem. There's not many openings. The critics that do have jobs are old. They've been doing the job for 30, 40 years. There's lots of opportunities to write for free, and unfortunately our media has really lent into the idea of volunteer work. So it's actually quite hard to find a publication that actually pays for reviews and those that do have their very small pool of writers. And the COVID had a further impact. The magazine that I write for primarily is a sliver of its old self. So it's a real challenge. And the other thing as well is there's tremendous constraints on what formats you can approach and how you can write when you're going with the paid publications. And it's very limited. It's 200, 300 words, and it has to be in a certain style, and it's very predictable. So on the other hand, I've seen an explosion of blog writers. We have very talented writers who are just doing their work because they want to. I would hope, historically, I'm thinking back, some of the earliest criticism was supported by the theatres. I'm thinking of Lessing working in Hamburg, well, eventually got the sack because of the arguments he caused by the comments that he made about the actors. But there's definitely a tradition where theatres can be involved in supporting that process. But again, what they want is they want a star rating so that they can get more funding, or they can boast to each other about who's the best. And there's a real danger that their only interest is self-interest. They're not really interested in allowing the form to develop or think about ways of doing it. They tend to use that to control the way that criticism works. So I'm very pessimistic, actually, it turns out, as I talk about that. And, but again, as you say, I think having money available and platforms like this open up a conversation. And in some ways, there's the possibility of people who work on blogs finding their own strategies, finding their own path, and bypassing the very conventional ways that we deal with criticism is much more exciting, I think, than I'm allowing myself to believe. I think it's something really positive.
Do you think that having a school for puppet theater makers, for the creators, is helpful to develop better and more puppet theater criticism? I'm asking because in Lithuania we do not have a school for like puppeteers. It's sometimes like once in 10 years there's one course of puppet theater actors or makers, but that's not a continuous process. And I think that's also one of the reasons why in Lithuania the critics who also study in the same academy, they don't get to know the art, the craft, how it's created. So that's one of the reasons why they don't really go to puppet theater, because they know nobody who is making it. So how do you think in your countries, what's the situation
I think
with
that this will help a lot. We see our puppet theater that is much better now than 10 years ago. It isn't creative, but it's maybe more precise or something like that. And these students and now, I don't know, puppeteers and also designers of puppets, they understand much more than the others that didn't go. They have practice, and they have also theory and history. So something must come into their heads, and they know what to do with it. I hope. Maybe you can ask them. Do you know something about anything? No. So no, it's the same.
No, but I think that's very important. I think in that way you're really lucky because you have a school for puppetry. Because we as well in Slovenia don't actually have a program for puppetry, and to acquire references that you need to connect when you watch a show, they're not there, you know. You don't have a course in puppetry history or history of contemporary puppetry, or even the technology of puppetry, all of that. So if you want to be a puppeteer, of course, you have to be employed in a theater and get experience. Okay, but if you just want to write about puppetry, it's really, where do you turn to? So I think in that way that you have a university for puppetry where you can actually provide those people with some knowledge, even if they don't want to be set designers for puppetry or puppetry makers, blah blah. There's still a way for them to get the knowledge. Whereas in our case, and probably maybe in Lithuania as well, it stands on the people who do puppetry to also educate the young people, which means that, it doesn't happen usually, and it's really hard to make it happen otherwise than by funded projects where we can, you know, get the money for it.
I think these projects are very important, like this one especially. Our girls saw in these 2 days, I don't know, four plays that they couldn't see in Croatia. Maybe in Slovenia, yes, in a festival there. But in Croatia, we have university. Yes, we have a study for puppetry and all. But we don't have very good contemporary puppetry. Our puppetry today is pretty traditional, and they cannot see in Osijek, where our academy is. They cannot see something like Dorian Gray or something like that. So these projects, I hope that we will go from project to project. Okay, maybe not. Because this is maybe the similar importance to them as when we talk about history.
And what's the situation in Scotland?
Very similar. There's very little opportunity. Certainly at universities, there's no puppetry history. It's quite excluded from general theatre studies. There are small outbursts of schools and courses that people can attend, but I think there's a tremendous amount of dedication at that point. That's some for people that want to learn the craft and develop the skills. So it's not something that perhaps a critic would be able to go on, or the general public. So yeah, it's very marginalised, absolutely.
I'm thinking maybe Inesa and Katarina, who are like a little bit from the outside, maybe you see some more positive things than we from inside are now complaining, and maybe you see some more positive things.
I've heard many positive things here around this table. Well, in terms of Croatia, like in puppetry, as Igor said, like it's more like traditional puppetry than contemporary, and I really do hope that our students, both students of puppet technology and design, and then actors, future young emerging actors and puppeteers, that they kind of bring this new energy and take all of this experience here to create something new, something different. So I think we kind of rely on the...
But problem is in money, like in criticism. We have municipally puppet theaters, and they want to be traditional. This is good for them. They have kids, they have everything they need, and this is it. And independent theaters don't have money. Like critics, like criticism, it's terrible for us.
But they create good things, you know. They create good performances.
Maybe we can say they sometimes create something contemporary, but then they play it once or twice, and that's it. But this is our future, maybe. Future is in their hands, so be wise with it. They want money, money, art. We live for art, not from art.
Inesa, would you like to add something?
I mean, obviously, I can't talk much about schools and such, but I think, you know, if there is a need, there's always going to be, well, actually, the other way around. If there is a demand, there's going to be opportunities. And since I started the program, I've been educating my friends as well, obviously, and they were really interested. And I think it's just maybe not enough people know about it. That's why it is marginalized, just because just people, yeah. They might not know much about it, but once you get yourself into that world, you start realizing the value of it and all. And yeah, I think this program, like if it continues or there are more programs like that would really help bringing puppetry to just general public. And you know, the more people know about things, the more people come to see the shows.
Especially
money they bring in
puppetry
and all that.
I think the importance is that we are putting contemporary puppetry in first line, because puppetry is okay. We have puppetry, we had puppetry, but contemporary puppetry is a place where you can really play with it. You can wiser your explore. And in Croatia, they do not see that potential
Yet.
I think also what you mentioned is really on point, because I think what we're still struggling with in puppetry, less and less, and it's going to turn out to be a blessing in a few years, I think, is that the puppetry is mainly regarded as a children's theater. So, and children's theater, why would you write criticism about that. If you can, you have to sell the shows, they have to see them, they have to like them. And I think all the experiments or contemporary moves that we do in puppetry usually don't even get to the general public because the general public understands it's something that I'm going to take my child to. And of course, okay, in Slovenia, we got lucky in the last 10 years. I think we slowly moved the barrier away from the considering puppetry as only for children. But I think in convincing people to read or create demand for puppetry criticism, that's still a few steps away, because we first need to convince them that it's real art. It's not just, you know, something to put your child and have a bit of a break. We need, because those things don't need academia. And this is, I think, the next step. That's why I think it's important to appear, to keep appearing, to be on the blogs, to be on platforms, in newspapers, these kind of events, little residences where we can meet, we can network, and show people what we do. I think here we also, it's not just, oh, the society is bad towards puppetry and we're all poor artists. I don't think it's that. I think we ourselves also close the doors usually, and most of the time we are our own, we are real theater, we are puppetry, we don't want to cooperate with drama, we don't want to be connected to dance. At least in my experience, that you realize that we're the closed off ones as well. It's not just bad things coming from outside, it's also from the inside that we need to let ourselves be a bit more wider our prospects in regards to academia, and not be offended by every single review that is written just because we don't get enough reviews, and those reviews that we get are negative, so we don't want reviews. Is a very bad mentality, I think, that is happening then, because we consider ourselves marginalized in the sense of education, criticism, and academia in general.
I think that's one of the consequences of people not studying together, not seeing each other work, not knowing each other work principles. I mean, theater makers and theater critics. When we are closer to each other, and I'm speaking from my personal experience because I worked as a dramaturg with several performances, and that also changed my writing a lot, because that was my first experience in theater making. So seeing from inside what's happening, how people think, and then the ideas you had in the beginning and the final result and on the stage is also always not the same. And so, and what do you see on stage and how do you read it? And that changes a lot when you try out the theater making and then theater writing. But I also thought maybe somebody from you would like ask something or add something, because there are also more authors from this book here in the audience.
And almost authors also.
Yeah. Potential authors.
Masha, do you have to say something? I should have been in the book, I know. Next time.
No, what I really find interesting is one of the last points you were talking about. So, yeah, there is a certain demand for criticism, but also what needs the education. It's also, how is the accepting of the criticism and how the criticism works. Because, what happens if you receive a negative criticism? And I think, it's not just a psychological problem. It is a systematic problem, and I think, it was just my thought that as we speak of talking about or learning about the history of puppetry, learning about the techniques of puppetry, it's also learning how to accept and know also the techniques of criticism, because I think sometimes also the critics are afraid of being honest and say, no, this doesn't work. Or if you wanted to show us as the creators one thought, one topic, maybe it didn't get to the audience. And we should talk also about like what is happening in this relation, creators, critics, and that we should talk, that this should be a field of dialogue. And sometimes, yeah, it will slower down the critics, and also the critics will learn, maybe that wasn't a good point I put out, and vice versa. So just a thought about that, or just putting something additional to it.
No, I think we can connect here in regards to Slovenian theater scene, because it's big and there's a lot of shows and everything, but it's relatively small. All of us know each other, everything. And then if you go to puppetry, it's even smaller. I sometimes joke like there's 5 people working in puppetry and they all know each other and they're all related. But it's, but that's the point. It's because you cannot just be a critic, because you have to also have another job. And it's usually in the fields of art. When you write a critic, I think you have in your mind, okay, I'm writing about this director. It's gonna be negative. Now, do I want to work with this director and make money to exist for the next 2 years? Because it's so small, it's so personal, that you really always have in the back of your head, I might never work with this person again because they are going to be offended by what I wrote, because there's no reflection, there's no discussion regarding this. And of course, yeah, the value of critical writing, I think, as Masha pointed out, it's important that it is stressed out on the both sides. So with the creators and with the writers, they have to, if the critic has to understand the value of a performance, the performance has to always understand the value of its critics.
I think that every artistic academy has to have criticism in their program, because that's the way to learn something about criticism. Criticism isn't just spitting on play or some director or saying nice thing. It's analyzing, it's playing with the play and show and performance, and this is very important. And a lot of people doesn't understand it, and I think they should.
Well, it's a chance to improve, isn't it? Yeah. You know, you get your critic, and you can work on it. You can make it better, or well, it's personal choice, I guess. But yeah, it should be taken as a feedback, not as a criticism of an actual, not negative criticism, but just a feedback which you can.
Who are the main important readers of today's critic or reviews?
The creators.
Yes, the creators. So this is a dialogue, but just one-sided dialogue, like monologue.
Yeah, that's why I think it's, as you mentioned, yeah, schools,
so we have a lot of power now, because they are reading us. We have the power, but we don't know it, and we don't have money.
No, I think the schools should have critical courses, like mandatory subjects, but not just for dramaturgs and people who study theater theory. No, for everybody, for actors, for directors. They all should experience this moment of you writing the review for another performance and then discussing.
Yes.
Yeah, the discussion part is, I think, the most important one, because you can, like now, everybody on social media can go read review and then react to it and say something like that stupid person that does not understand anything. And that's also public, and it's part of discussion, but that's not really a discussion when you just say that's stupid or get angry or offended. So it's also the last part of the after writing reviews, the discussion and how to create the field for or space for the discussion that is one polite and then productive. So that's also an interesting question, maybe for everybody, especially for people who teach practitioners of theater criticism and also theater making. How to create the field of discussion, how to speak, actually to talk to each other.
I have a question. Do you find that there's a conflict in each country between traditional puppetry? You spoke a bit about the theatres wanting traditional puppetry for children, do you see a conflict between the artists that are making traditional work and then people
I don't
trying
know,
to
is there a conflict? Maybe the older artists, but I think they doesn't know what contemporary puppetry can do, and they don't care about it. It's like ignoration, not conflict. It's much worse than conflict. It would be good that...
How do they react then to the writing now about... I wonder how a critic writes about a traditional piece of work and a contemporary piece, and whether there's...
I think the critic must be one of the audience. And I write a lot of puppet theater and theater for kids and youth. And when I write about kids performances, I watch kids, and I cannot watch through their eyes, but you see where they fall down, where they got lost in the show. And I think that if you write about traditional puppet play, you know for whom it was. I cannot say it's stupid because it's not contemporary. We have great traditional plays and great and terrible contemporary plays. But so I think the most important thing is that you have to try to think as the audience that is in focus of the play. And a lot of critics in Croatia doesn't do it. And this is one of the problems, one of many problems. And of course, money is the biggest.
Does anyone want to add anything to this?
I mean, I don't think that in Slovenia we have like a conflict between traditional and contemporary. I think our two institutions, puppetry institutions, are quite well aware of the importance of tradition, really tradition in a sense of keeping the techniques alive. Contemporary puppetry often doesn't use a puppet as a classical puppet, marionette or tabletop puppet, blah, blah. But, and then of course you have to experiment, you have to try new forms. The only way for a puppet to survive is to reinvent herself. It's always been like this. I think that's a push of puppetry that it has through history. And I think, yeah, it's important to have all the different aspects. And of course, some puppeteers, some directors are going to perform and direct and prefer to do that in a more classical sense, and some of them maybe never even were working with puppets, only with materials, only with different objects, and that's their thing. And I think here, are we discussing enough about the connections and about the, existing in the same theater, for example, in the same space? Probably not. But I think we don't have a conflict, we just coexist, and then sometimes mix in different projects and performances. And I think we mustn't now condemn the tradition and say, no, this is not contemporary puppetry. In a sense it is. If it was made now, it was made with the contemporary advances that we have. So it all, I think, fits into contemporary puppetry. And we should, if we are talking about critics being excluded from the theater world, from discussion, from being printed in media, it's the same with traditional theater ways. They are getting excluded from the space of their work because we are convinced that only contemporary is now good and it's in and it's going to sell, even though we are proven over and over again that the settings that were done in previous centuries still work, they still resonate with us, from the text to the techniques to creations, I think.
Rimas had a question. Gerai.
Ar gerai supratau, problema miršta kritika, reikia ją animuoti kaip Lėlę, tik tai problema pinigai. Teisingai supratau?
Taip.
Okay. Tai dabar klausimas, bet įdomu man, ar žino visi UNIMA, UNESCO globojama organizacija, ar prisideda prie šio projekto šitą organizaciją, jei ne, ką jie galvoja apskritai, gal UNIMai neatrodo, kad miršta kritika, ar čia yra konfliktas koks? Dar vienas dalykas, o paslaptis turbūt visiems, aišku, pinigų yra, tik jie ne ten nuplaukia. Tai va, dėl UNIMos norėčiau.
Okay, I'll try to translate the question. It was about Unima, this association of puppeteers, does it contribute or in any way is a partner of the project, or is it interested in contemporary puppetry criticism? And also, Rima said that of course there is money, but it just goes to
wrong pockets.
to wrong purposes. So what about this organization?
Croatian Unima is very slow. They don't do anything except going to Bali this year. I think they work 4 years to go to Bali, to buy tickets with our как се каже членарина?
With your critics' money?
with our membership's money, and this is very very sad. And they could do a lot of stuff, but they don't want to. In Slovenia?
No, I think Unima, of course, we contacted them at the beginning of this project. They were even on the kickoff meeting, which was happened via Zoom, so it's kind of lame. But there's, I think, a universal approval for everything we do. You know, not only Unima, everybody always says it's great that you do this. But the question is, how can we connect and work on? I think that is something that awaits us in the next half a year when the project is coming to an end, to connect with these big institutions. Now the question is, do we want that or not? And that's not a question I would like to answer right now.
And what about in Scotland?
I think it's quite isolated, this project, and every other group of theatre makers. I think, going back to the previous question, it's very interesting that many people working in contemporary puppetry don't like to call themselves puppeteers. It's visual theatre. So in that sense, the landscape is very different, because we are often talking to people who you would assume would be very happy to embrace puppetry, but actually they want to be associated with this more broad category that sounds less like it's for children. So it comes back to that same problem. But no, certainly in terms of the connection with the actual puppet makers, Puppet Animation Scotland is very engaged with them, and in some ways it leads them. I'm not sure that that's quite the right way to put it. I'm not sure I want people to hear me saying it in that way, but the opportunity to get together and sort of be aware of what's happening here is something that Puppet Animation has facilitated very effectively, I feel.
Okay, thank you.
And in Lithuania?
I'm not a member of Unima, to confess, so I'm not really sure, but I think they are like really trying to help the theater makers, not the critics. I don't think, but maybe somebody can correct me, who is a part of Lithuanian. Okay, so Vilmant has corrected me, because now Klaipėda Puppet Theatre is like the head of the theatre is also the head of Unima, so they work with us together to create these criticism workshops.
Yeah, I think Unima is great because it connects us, and it is a kind of a theoretical and moral and practical high end where you can always turn to. But I think it's not just going to happen, you know. I think they will be very interested, even like the international Unima, to accept critics as well. I think it's showing with, you know, workshops and stuff like that. But the initiative has to come from us. You know, it's not just going to happen. We can just sit here with our little project and say, why is nobody clapping for us and coming with money? And I think this is a lot of times we say, oh yeah, but they didn't do anything, or this one didn't do anything. But the fact is, did we, you know, come there? So I think, yeah, the next step is like this. So if we want puppetry criticism to stay alive, we have to go to these kind of institutions, Unima and other like local institutions, say, we have this. Can you help us, or can you at least support us? Because even like the media support is sometimes enough for something to stay on a certain level.
Okay, I think that optimistic tone could be a perfect end to this conversation. I invite everybody to read the book. and to keep talking about puppetry and puppetry criticism.
We will
Thank
soon have e-books, so you because we don't have a lot of books here.
Even
Now
more
you can clap.
convenient. Yeah, thank you.